The first thing I noticed when I stepped out of the taxi wasn't my house. It wasn't the fresh-cut grass, the warm summer breeze, or the familiar mailbox with faded blue paint. It was my neighbor. She looked up from watering her flowers, froze for a single heartbeat, then let the garden hose fall into the grass. Without caring that the scorching pavement burned her feet, she ran barefoot across the yard with tears already streaming down her face. Before I could even set my duffel bag on the ground, she threw her arms around me as though she had been holding her breath for 6 long months. At that moment, I knew something had happened while I was gone. Something no letter, no satellite call, and no message from the middle of the ocean had ever told me. Before this story continues, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to the channel Heartwarming Tales. If stories like this remind you that hope can survive even the darkest storms. My name is Rowan Mercer, and for almost 12 years, I had worked aboard cargo ships, crossing oceans from one continent to another. Life at sea was lonely, exhausting, and repetitive, but it paid enough to keep my small home and support the simple future I kept promising myself I would eventually live. Every departure felt the same. I locked my front door, waved to the neighbors, boarded another vessel, and disappeared beyond the horizon for months. The world on land kept moving, while mine stood still somewhere between endless water and endless sky. My neighborhood had never been extraordinary. It was one of those quiet streets where everyone knew each other's names without needing invitations. Children rode bicycles until sunset. Elderly couples watered flowers every morning, and neighbors shoveled each other's driveways after winter storms. Across from my little white house lived Marin Ellis, a widow in her early 60s, whose silver hair always escaped from under a floppy gardening hat. She had lived there longer than anyone else, and somehow managed to know every birthday, anniversary, and family story on the street. Before every voyage, Marin insisted on checking my mailbox, trimming my hedges, and making sure the place never looked abandoned. I always offered to pay her, but she never accepted a single dollar. She would simply smile, wave her hand, and say that neighbors looked after neighbors because one day, everyone needed someone. Those words never meant much to me until the voyage that changed everything. Halfway through the trip, we sailed through one of the worst storms I had ever experienced. Towering waves slammed into the ship with enough force to shake every bolt in the steel hull. Sleep disappeared for days as we fought to keep equipment secured and cargo balanced. Communications failed more than once, leaving us completely isolated from the world. Every sailor aboard learned once again how small human beings truly are compared to the sea. When we finally reached our destination weeks later, internet service returned, but only briefly. I found only a handful of unread emails. Most were bills or shipping schedules. One message from Marin simply read that everything back home was fine and that I should stay safe. I smiled, closed the laptop, and assumed life had continued exactly as I had left it. I couldn't have been more wrong. As Marin held me in that desperate embrace outside my house, I noticed she was trembling. Behind her, several neighbors had quietly stepped onto their porches. None of them looked surprised to see me. Instead, they looked relieved. Only after we finally stepped inside my house did I understand why. Everything was spotless. The hardwood floors gleamed. Fresh curtains hung over the windows. My refrigerator contained milk, fruit, eggs, and homemade soup, carefully labeled with dates. A vase filled with fresh sunflowers rested on the dining table. Someone hadn't simply watched my home. Someone had been living through it with love. Marin finally gathered herself and explained what had happened during my absence. About 2 months after I had sailed away, a powerful electrical storm swept through our town. Lightning struck an aging transformer near my property in the middle of the night, Sparks ignited part of my garage before firefighters arrived. The flames were stopped quickly, but smoke and water damaged much of the house. Insurance eventually approved repairs, but weeks passed before contractors even arrived. During that time, vandals noticed the empty property and attempted to break in twice. That was when the neighborhood quietly came together. Without asking permission or expecting recognition, every family on the street took responsibility for my home. One repaired the broken fence, another cleaned smoke stains from the walls. A retired electrician volunteered to replace damaged wiring. A carpenter rebuilt cabinets that water had ruined. Teenagers mowed the lawn every weekend. Someone even repainted the front porch because they thought I'd appreciate coming home to something cheerful. Listening to Marin describe everything felt unreal. These people owed me nothing. Many of them barely knew me beyond simple greetings. Yet somehow, while I crossed oceans carrying cargo for strangers, strangers had carried my life safely across its own storm. The greatest surprise, however, was still waiting. Marin walked into the hallway and handed me a thick notebook. The cover simply read, "While you were away." Inside were hundreds of handwritten pages. Every family on the street had written entries. Some described the repairs. Others shared neighborhood news. Children drew pictures of my house with the words, "Welcome home." One elderly man admitted he had finally learned to bake bread after burning 7 loaves. A young couple announced they were expecting twins. Someone taped photographs of community barbecues, Christmas lights, spring flowers, and summer picnics. It wasn't just a journal. It was 6 months of life I had unknowingly missed, preserved one memory at a time, so I would never feel forgotten. As I slowly turned each page, tears blurred the ink. For years, I had believed my job demanded sacrifice. I accepted loneliness as the price of stability. I convinced myself that working hard was enough, even if it meant living quietly without close friendships. That notebook proved I had never been as alone as I imagined. Over the following days, I visited every home on the street. I expected polite conversations. Instead, I was welcomed into kitchens filled with fresh pies, lemonade, grilled burgers, and endless laughter. People shared stories of the repairs with surprising humor. The carpenter admitted measuring one window upside down. Children confessed they accidentally sprayed each other more than the flowers while watering my garden. Even the failed break-in had become neighborhood legend because 3 elderly women had chased the would-be thieves away by banging pots and pans from their porches. Every story reminded me that ordinary people create extraordinary moments without realizing it. The more I learned, the heavier my heart became. Not from sadness, from gratitude. One afternoon, I walked through my repaired garage. Near the workbench hung a small wooden plaque I had never seen before. It read, "A house stands because of walls. A home stands because of people." No one admitted making it. Everyone insisted someone else deserved the credit. That anonymous gift somehow became my favorite part of the entire house. A week later, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of immediately signing another 6-month contract at sea, I requested unpaid leave. For the first time in over a decade, I stayed home. Every morning I joined Marin in tending her garden. I helped neighbors repair fences. I coached local kids who wanted to learn basic sailing knots. On weekends, we organized community breakfasts where no one left hungry. The neighborhood that had once simply been my address slowly became my family. As autumn approached, I finally understood something the ocean had never been able to teach me. Success isn't measured only by money earned or miles traveled. Sometimes success is returning home and realizing your absence mattered because your presence had mattered first. Months later, we held the largest neighborhood gathering anyone could remember. Long tables stretched across front yards beneath colorful lights. Children laughed until sunset. Older couples danced slowly on the pavement. The smell of fresh bread, grilled vegetables, and homemade desserts drifted through the warm evening air. Before dinner began, Marin stood and quietly thanked everyone for protecting not just a house, but a person who had spent too many years believing he faced life alone. I looked around the gathering and noticed something remarkable. Nobody considered their actions extraordinary. To them, helping was simply what decent people did. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Real kindness rarely announces itself. It quietly fixes broken fences. It fills empty refrigerators. It waters forgotten flowers. It writes journals so someone returning home will know they were never forgotten. Most importantly, it runs barefoot across a yard, simply because someone made it home safely. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how powerful simple acts of kindness can be. Special request: in the comments, tell us the name of someone who has shown you unexpected kindness. Your story might inspire someone else who needs hope today. I eventually returned to the sea, one final time, but everything felt different. I no longer sailed to escape routine or chase another paycheck. I sailed knowing there was a place waiting for me that felt richer than any destination on a map. Every sunrise over the ocean reminded me that somewhere beyond the horizon stood a quiet street where neighbors watched over one another without expecting applause. When I finally retired a year later, there was no grand ceremony or expensive celebration. There was only a front yard filled with smiling faces, homemade food, laughter echoing through the afternoon sunshine, and one familiar woman who greeted me with the same warm embrace she had given me months before. This time, she wasn't crying because something terrible had happened. She was smiling because she knew, just as I did, that I was finally home for good. And as I looked around at the people who had quietly rebuilt my house, protected my memories, and restored my faith in humanity, I realized the greatest treasure I had ever carried wasn't hidden in the cargo holds of distant ships. It had been waiting for me all along, right across the yard, in the hearts of neighbors who chose kindness when no one was watching.